Ethan Blackwell, CEO of a New York financial empire, a man whose coldness and perfectionism are as famous as his vast fortune. He lives in a world of immaculate designer suits, billion-dollar decisions, and a heart that is considered untouchable. In stark contrast is Grace Holloway, her new secretary, smart and efficient, but with an unexpected past. She was once homeless. What will happen when these two seemingly incompatible worlds collide in a high-pressure office environment? But the key, the thing that will keep you listening, is a dark secret from the past, an event that inadvertently tied their fates together long before they met again in the CEO's office. Is Ethan the unsung hero of Grace's painful past? Or is he, or his empire, partly responsible for pushing her down that path? As the truth unfolds, can gratitude coexist with hurt and doubt? Or will a buried secret destroy it all? Join me as I turn the pages of this dramatic and emotional tale. The 60th floor of the Blackwell Industries Tower is a world unto itself, a realm of glass and steel, where the air seems more filtered, the sunlight more intense, and the silence carries the weight of billions of dollars. At the center of that world is Ethan Blackwell. Sitting behind a vast, austerely minimalist ebony desk, he is the embodiment of tightly controlled power. His thick black hair is perfectly trimmed, his navy blue bespoke suit unwrinkled, his silk tie tied in a precise Windsor knot. Everything about Ethan exudes perfectionism, coldness, and an almost unbridgeable distance. The board meeting has just ended. The seasoned executives left the room, both relieved and nervous after facing the young CEO's pointed questions and uncompromising demands. Ethan spared no words, showed no unnecessary emotion. He ran this massive financial empire with a cold, analytical mind and an iron discipline imposed on both himself and those around him. When the room became quiet, Ethan allowed himself to lean back in his chair. He raised his hand to rub his temples, a gesture that was almost unconscious but revealed the tension hidden beneath his calm exterior. His deep blue eyes, usually razor-sharp, now looked out at the Manhattan skyline with an indescribable distance. His expensive suit was like a layer of armor, perfectly shielding him, but sometimes he felt its weight. The office door opened slightly, and Grace Holloway entered, carrying a stack of documents. She was Ethan's new executive secretary, hired a few months ago after a rigorous screening process. At 28, Grace possessed a quiet beauty, intelligence, and a surprising calmness in this high-pressure environment. Her long golden brown hair was tied back in a neat bun. Her business attire was elegant and well-fitting, but not too flashy. What set her apart was not her appearance, but her hazel eyes, clear and penetrating, that seemed to see more than others let on. "Mr. Blackwell, here is the market analysis report you requested," Grace said, placing the file on the table, her voice clear and professional. Ethan just nodded, not looking up. "Leave it." Grace turned to leave, but Ethan spoke abruptly. "Ms. Holloway?" "Yes, sir?" "The Harrison Fund's portfolio restructuring project. I want a detailed risk assessment and alternative scenarios on my desk by 9 a.m. tomorrow morning." He looked at her, his eyes sharp and appraising. This was a complex task, requiring in-depth knowledge of finance, far beyond the usual responsibilities of a secretary. He wanted to see how far this girl could go. Grace was a little surprised by the sudden request and the huge workload, but she only responded calmly. "Yes, sir. I will complete it." That night, the 60th floor office was only lit by Grace's computer screen and a small desk lamp. She worked diligently, her fingers flying quickly over the keyboard, her brain working at full capacity. She had worked very hard to get this position, to escape the past she had always hidden. Images of cold winter nights on the streets, of poor meals in the shelter, sometimes haunted her sleep. It was those harsh experiences that forged her resilience, keen observation, and a compassion that she rarely showed on the outside. Near midnight, Ethan returned to the office to retrieve some forgotten documents. He was surprised to find Grace still there, completely absorbed in her work. He stood silently at the door for a moment, observing the way she worked, the intense focus, the logical approach, and the way she unconsciously bit her lower lip as she pondered a complex problem. There was a quiet intelligence and determination that radiated from her that he had never noticed before. The next morning, at exactly 8:45, the detailed report, clearly presented, logically, with insightful analysis and clever alternative scenarios, landed on Ethan's desk. He skimmed through it, then reread it. She had not only completed the task, but had done it better than he had expected. She had seen potential risks that even his team of analysts had missed. For the first time since Grace had started working, Ethan actually looked at her with silent recognition. Over the next few days, Ethan began to notice Grace more. Not just her work performance, but the little details. The way she could fix the broken office coffee machine with just a few simple steps without having to call a technician. The way she always had a cup of warm herbal tea ready when she noticed signs of stress in him by the way he rubbed his temples. The way she spoke softly but sympathetically to the janitor who had just lost a loved one. There was a warmth and kindness hidden within this seemingly neat and professional woman. One afternoon, while watching the news on TV in the private waiting room, a report about the city's rising homeless population suddenly appeared. Grace happened to walk in to give an update on her schedule. She paused for a second when she saw the image on the screen. Her face paled slightly before quickly regaining her usual calm. Ethan, who usually never paid attention to social news, also fell silent, his eyes looking at the screen with a strange, almost painful, but fleeting look. In that moment, an invisible, fragile thread seemed to vibrate between two people from two completely different worlds. Grace noticed on Ethan's shirt cuff, near the expensive white gold cufflinks, a small, faint but quite distinct scar. A scar that looked strangely familiar. But she quickly dismissed the thought. How could it be? His world and her past were thousands of miles apart. However, she also began to sense something different, hidden behind the CEO's cold, perfect exterior. There were small cracks in the armor, fleeting moments that revealed a soul much more complex than what he showed. Ethan and Grace's interactions with each other gradually moved beyond the dry work environment when a major merger project required them to work closely together. Late evenings at the office became more frequent. Without the tension of daytime meetings, the silence of the skyscraper at night created an awkward intimacy. One night, as they were reviewing the complex contract terms, a sudden summer storm hit the city. Rain lashed the windows, lightning streaked across the pitch-black sky, and within minutes, the power in the entire building went out, save for a weak emergency light shining from the hallway. They were stranded on the 60th floor. "Awesome," Ethan muttered, his voice unusually tired and irritated. He loosened his tie, a small gesture that made him seem less distant. Grace, instead of panicking, was calm. She found a few spare candles in a drawer and lit them, the warm yellow glow spreading through the dark office, creating an unusually intimate atmosphere. "At least we have light," she said softly, smiling reassuringly. "Would you like something to drink? I think the coffee maker still has some hot water." Ethan was surprised by her calm and matter-of-factness in the unexpected situation. He nodded. While they waited for the backup power to kick in, they sat across from each other at the small table in Ethan's break room, the flickering candlelight and the sound of rain hitting the glass windows as company. The silence was no longer oppressive, but more comfortable. "You don't seem worried," Ethan remarked, taking a sip of black coffee. Grace shrugged. "I've been in worse situations than this. A few hours without power isn't the end of the world." She said it casually, but Ethan felt the weight behind the simple statement. "Worse?" he asked softly, curiosity overcoming his usual cold demeanor. Grace hesitated for a moment, looking at the burning candle. "There were times. Things were difficult. I learned how to cope in many situations." She didn't go into details, but her eyes had a distant sadness. That night, in the quiet space and warm candlelight, the ice wall between them seemed to melt a little. Ethan, perhaps due to fatigue and unusual circumstances, shared a little about the pressure of having to shoulder the enormous responsibility of Blackwell Industries from a very young age, about the huge shadow of his late father. Grace just listened silently, but the understanding in her eyes made Ethan feel a connection he had never experienced. He realized he was saying things he had never revealed to anyone. He also began to see Grace in a different light, not just as a smart secretary, but as a woman with extraordinary inner strength who had overcome adversities he could hardly imagine. A deep respect arose within him, and with it, a growing attraction that he tried to deny. He was not used to this feeling, the feeling of vulnerability, the feeling of wanting to know more about this mysterious woman. Grace was also confused by her own feelings. She was attracted to Ethan's intelligence, his determination, and the rare moments of weakness she caught a glimpse of. But the social distance, the boss-employee position, and more importantly, her fear of being hurt from the past, caused her to erect barriers. On another occasion, while they were preparing for an important meeting, Ethan accidentally spilled hot coffee on his hand. He winced in pain, but tried to act normal. Grace, without hesitation, immediately ran to get the first aid kit, gently washed his burn, and applied ointment with careful, practiced movements. "You seem to know first aid," Ethan remarked, a little surprised by her quickness. Her hand touched his skin, surprisingly warm and soft. "A necessary skill when you're on your own," Grace replied softly, avoiding his gaze. She focused on bandaging the wound. When she looked up, their eyes met. In that moment, an invisible current ran between them, intense and undeniable. Ethan looked down at his carefully bandaged hand. Then he looked into Grace's hazel eyes. A vague, disjointed memory flashed through his mind. A cold winter night, heavy snow, a dark alley, a figure huddled in the cold, a faint cry for help. And his hand, which also had a small wound from hitting something while trying to help. He shook his head, trying to clear the image. It must be his imagination. But the seeds of doubt had been planted in Ethan's heart. He began to pay closer attention to the small scar on his shirt cuff, the one he had tried to ignore. He also noticed the old, faded blue button that Grace sometimes used as a bookmark. A button that looked disturbingly familiar. A vague sense of guilt and curiosity about Grace's past grew within him, mixed with a fascination he could no longer deny. He felt himself standing on the brink of a truth that he both feared and longed to uncover. This year's Blackwell Industries annual charity event was held at a large art museum, not far from the downtown area, near the streets Grace had walked in her darkest days. Ethan, as chairman of the board of trustees, and Grace, as executive assistant, were both in attendance. Grace wore a simple yet elegant navy blue evening gown that she had picked out herself from a high-end thrift store, a thrift habit from her past. She had tied her hair up in a bun, exposing her long neck and slender shoulders. Though she felt a little uncomfortable in the lavish upper-class crowd, she remained calm and professional. Ethan, as usual, was the center of attention in his impeccable tuxedo. But tonight, his mind was not entirely focused on the social scene. He found himself constantly watching Grace, drawn to her quiet grace and fragile beauty amidst the splendor. He also felt an indescribable unease around this part of town, scattered memories of that winter night lingering in his mind. Once the formal ceremony was over, and the guests began to move about and chat freely, Grace separated from Ethan to handle a few small logistical tasks. She walked through a hallway of modern sculptures. Suddenly, she stopped in front of a recycled metal sculpture depicting a person huddled in the cold. It brought back strong memories. She unconsciously reached out to touch the faded blue button that she always kept with her as a memento, the only thing left of the coat that the kind stranger had given her that terrible night. Ethan happened to walk over and saw her standing silently in front of the sculpture, her hand fiddling with the button. The light from the museum spotlights shone on the button, highlighting its distinctive silvery blue color and the small scratch on its surface. At the same time, his eyes swept over the faint scar on his own white shirt cuff. All the pieces suddenly came together in Ethan's mind. The button, the scar, the dark alley. the young girl shivering with cold and fear, the weak voice of thanks, the guilt and helplessness when he had to leave so quickly afterwards for some reason he could no longer remember. It was her, the girl he had saved that night, the girl whose image had haunted him for years despite his efforts to forget, was Grace Holloway, his secretary. He was stunned, his face pale. Grace turned around and caught his bewildered expression. She also saw his eyes fixed on the button on her hand, then down at the scar on his wrist. A crazy but unignorable suspicion flashed through her mind. That scar, that deep but urgent voice that night. "Mr. Blackwell?" Grace's voice trembled. This button, and your scar?" She stuttered, not daring to finish her sentence. Ethan couldn't lie, couldn't hide anymore. His cold, perfectly controlled mask was shattered. He looked deep into Grace's hazel eyes that were wide with confusion, his voice hoarse with emotion. "It was me, Grace. That winter night. In the alley near the Brooklyn Bridge. I found you. You. In the snow." He admitted, the words coming out with difficulty, revealing the torment and complicated emotions he had buried for so long. Grace took a step back, feeling as if the ground beneath her feet was crumbling. The man who had saved her life, the man she had been secretly grateful to for all these years, was none other than Ethan Blackwell, the cold, powerful boss, a man from a completely different world. Her emotions were in turmoil, deep gratitude, utter surprise, and a vague sense of betrayal. Why had he been silent all this time? What did he see her as? An object of pity? A secret to hide? Why didn't you say anything?" Tears began to roll down Grace's cheeks. "You knew it was me, right? All this time?" Ethan stepped closer, wanting to explain, wanting to touch her but afraid of hurting her more. I wasn't sure at first, just vague memories. Then when I realized, I was scared, Grace. Scared of embarrassing you, afraid you'd think I pitied you. I also tried to forget that night. It haunted me." For the first time, he revealed his weakness, his confusion. "I don't know what to do." The truth was laid bare between them, painful and complicated. The fragile relationship that had just blossomed between boss and employee, between two people attracted to each other, was now overshadowed by the past and secrets. The trust that had just been built was shaken violently. Grace felt suffocated in the lavish atmosphere of the party, feeling the distance between her and Ethan was now 1,000 times greater than the gap in social status. I need time," Grace whispered, turning and walking quickly out of the museum, leaving Ethan standing alone in the bright lights, his heart heavy and his perfect facade completely shattered. He knew that, in order to have a chance at reconciliation, he had to face his own past and prove his sincerity with actions, not just words. In the days after that fateful night at the museum, an invisible wall of ice had once again built up between Ethan and Grace, but this time, it was made of hurt, confusion, and unresolved emotions. Grace worked professionally but kept her distance, avoiding any unnecessary interactions. She had handed in her resignation, but Ethan, in a surprising move, asked her to give him and them both time to think. Ethan was no longer the cold, work-oriented CEO he had been. The revelation seemed to free him from the burden he had been holding back, but it also forced him to face his true self. He began to research homeless support organizations in the city, not just by writing charity checks like before, but actually taking the time to research and learn about the difficulties they faced. He quietly set up a personal foundation under a different name, focused on providing education and employment opportunities for young people who had been through the same situation as Grace. It was not an act of reparation to her, but an acknowledgement of responsibility and a desire to create real change. He also respected Grace's space, did not pressure her, did not try to use power or money to hold her back. Instead, he left small, sincere gestures of care on her desk. An art book she had mentioned, a herbal tea to relieve stress, a simple handwritten note asking about her health. A week later, Grace received a handwritten letter from Ethan. Not a work email, not an order, but a neatly handwritten letter on his personal office paper. In the letter, he did not justify his silence, but frankly admitted his fear, confusion, and even cowardice when facing his past and his complicated feelings for her. He wrote about how he admired her strength, intelligence, and kindness, about how she had unconsciously changed him. He did not ask for her forgiveness, just asked for a chance to talk frankly, as two equal people, no longer boss and employee, no longer haunted by past secrets. Grace read the letter over and over again, her heart in turmoil. She saw the sincerity in each word, the change in Ethan's quiet actions over the past days. She also had to admit that her feelings for him were not just gratitude or temporary admiration. She was attracted by the complex person hidden behind the billionaire's shell, by his intelligence, determination, and the wounds he hid. She decided to meet him. The conversation took place not in a powerful office, but at a small, quiet coffee shop on the weekend. They sat across from each other, no longer in suits or stiff office clothes. For the first time, they really saw each other as normal people, with full strengths, weaknesses, and scars in their souls. Ethan told her more about his family, about the pressure, about the loneliness at the top of power. Grace also shared for the first time in more detail about the difficult years on the street, about the fear, the despair, but also the glimmer of hope that helped her stand up. They listened to each other, understood, and sympathized. "I know sorry isn't enough, Grace," Ethan said, his voice low. "But I want you to know that my feelings for you are real. They have nothing to do with the past or guilt. I admire you, I respect you, and I love you. I love the strong, smart, kind person you've become, despite everything." Grace looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity that couldn't be hidden. "I have feelings for you too. Well, you, Ethan. But I need time to trust, to be sure that we can build a relationship based on truth and respect." Ethan nodded. "I'll wait, and I'll show it with my actions." They started over, slowly and carefully. Grace withdrew her resignation, but their relationship had changed. Ethan treated her with absolute respect and equality at work, while patiently rebuilding trust on a personal level. They had lunch together, occasionally took a walk in the park after work, and shared stories of everyday life. Ethan visited Grace's cozy studio apartment, no longer distant, but sincerely admiring the warmth she created. Grace also gradually opened up, allowing herself to see another Ethan, warm, caring, and sometimes awkward in expressing emotions. Of course, their relationship was not without its share of gossip and curious glances at Blackwell Industries. But Ethan publicly defended Grace, affirmed their serious relationship, and faced all challenges with steadfastness. A few months later, on a beautiful autumn afternoon, Ethan and Grace visited a community center for disadvantaged youth, where Ethan's foundation was sponsoring a career guidance program. Seeing Grace's bright smile as she talked and encouraged the children, Ethan felt a peace and happiness he had never known. He gently took her hand. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" Grace smiled at him. "For showing me that, beneath this billionaire suit, there is still a heart that loves, and for giving that heart a reason to beat again." They looked at each other, love and understanding shining in their eyes. Their journey was challenging, starting from two separate worlds and a secret past. But it was those things that brought them together, helping them peel away their layers, heal their wounds, and find true love in the most unexpected places. The future still lies ahead, but now they are ready to face it together, hand in hand. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you like this content, don't forget to click like, share this story with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more meaningful stories.